I was still muted. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aaron Canola. Welcome back once again to another edition of the Movie Battleground, and we are here tonight with another match for you guys. And this one is an exciting one because we have two competitors, one of whom has been a long-standing member of the league, another who made a big impact late into last season, and both of whom are in good standings in terms of the rankings, who are coming in here to try and start off on the right foot. And I will go ahead and move on to speaking to the competitors, and I'll kind of fill you in on their background as we talk to them, so as not to kill time here. So we will introduce first, coming in with a record of 3 wins, 1 defeat with 1 knockout. He is Calamity John Maher. John, I swear to you, so help me God, as much as I can, we will keep Uwe Boll out of this.
Thank you.
But you come in, sir. Obviously, 3 wins back to back, including a knockout on your debut last year, was a hell of a way to start establishing yourself very quickly as a potentially very dominant player. Obviously, a tough loss to Will in the tournament, but it was a tournament, and Will, I think, surprised everyone by having the most kind of upset tournament of the players that made it to the semifinals. So how are you feeling coming back in for your second season, your first full one here?
I can't feel bad about the first season, coming in with not, as a newer player, not really watching many of the videos, to be honest with you, and no offense, these are long videos, people. If you watch these videos, you're a trooper.
I'll take 5 seconds. I'll take the view.
Yeah, right. Just getting into the format, getting my feet wet, getting with it, realizing maybe my style of talking and my, this northeastern East Coast douchebag stuff is not everybody's cup of tea. So, I've had to make some corrections in the off season, but I feel good. I still feel confident that I know what I'm talking about and that I can be persuasive. So we'll see if I have the courage and the fortitude to change how I present myself in this new season.
Absolutely. And we all know that if all else fails, just start screaming. And it might do something.
Get louder.
I'm just saying, Jay made it to a title match. Anything can happen. With that said, though, we'll go ahead and put you in the back and introduce your opponent. Returning to the battleground, coming in with a record of 5 wins, 3 defeats, and 2 knockouts. He is Jeremy the Atom Adams. Jeremy, welcome back, sir. This is your first time here in a while following your last appearance. I believe it was last August was when it was at least recorded in a number 1 contenders match versus Amaru Moses. Of course, he took the victory there. He has since gone on to become the champion of the league, so he did not waste that match. Mm-hmm. But you took some time off. You had a slot in the tournament. You opted to stay out for a bit. How do you feel coming now back refreshed into the new year with that break under your belt?
I feel like it's been a long time since I played. August feels like a long time ago, and I'm feeling a little rusty, honestly, and I'm just hoping that, once we start talking, those nerves will kind of go away and I'll get back into the groove of it. But, a little peek behind the curtain. Every match I've ever played, I've gone in with a lot of nerves, and I've had some great showings and some of these things where I start off kind of like, oh God, why am I doing this? By the end, it's like an awesome experience. And, even a couple of the ones I didn't win, they were just awesome battles. So, I'm just trying to get back into that flow that I kind of was in last season after a long break. And I know I have a real tough opponent tonight. We've faced each other in trivia. We're facing each other here, and I respect the guy a lot. So, we'll see what happens. This really could kind of go either way for me, the state that I'm in. But like I said, I've kind of felt that way in the past. So,
yeah, absolutely. It's probably sick to say, but I take pleasure in the fact that I give people that much mental stress. But nevertheless, you are here. So let's get through this, shall we? Welcome back, guys. Let's get into it. Movie Battleground is a game that is a best of 5 rounds. It is the first to 3 points will win the match. Each round is worth 1 point. If a competitor picks up the first 3 points in a row, that will be a victory by knockout. That's the most fun way to win. It's also the quickest. The longest way to win is if you're tied 2-2 at the end of 4 rounds. We will move on to the blind round, but we'll worry about that should we have to go there. In terms of these 4 questions, you guys have had them. You have had the time to prep as much as you can. You will each get a 60-second opening followed by a 2-minute expansion period. There will be a 4-minute open discussion back and forth to get more points in, followed by 60 seconds to close out the round. Following that, I have 3 judges backstage in the form of Zach, Alec, and Jake. They will join us on screen, and based on the arguments you have made, we'll make a deliberation on who gets the win. With all that said, guys, are we ready to go?
I want to point out that I also respect Jeremy.
Thank you.
There we go. I didn't say that.
That's fair. You don't want to get called the asshole. Everybody right. Respects everybody.
There's mutual respect here, everybody. Just remember that.
That's you can disrespect me. If anyone wants to disrespect somebody, send it to my way. That's fine. I'll live. But let's jump into this. And coming into it, we are going to be starting in a realm of classics, talking about, again, it's not something that comes up very often, but every once in a while we throw in a classics question, and it's always a good one. Today we're going to be focusing on director Hal Ashby, whose name you probably don't know. I'm just being real. You probably don't know this guy's name, but the odds are you've heard of a couple of his films, including the ones that we have here tonight. The question is, what is the best film directed by Mr. Hal Ashby? Now, behind the scenes, Jeremy, you are the higher ranked of the 2 competitors, so you had a choice. You chose to go first on questions 2 and 4, which means, John, you will have the honor of beginning the game for us. And as I bring in your timer, I'm going to wish you both the best of luck. John, the timer will start ticking when you begin speaking.
When we talk about Hal Ashby's career, it's a meteoric rise and like a really tragic decline. The man died at 59 years old, pancreatic cancer, and even before that, right in the middle of his career, he succumbed to the excesses of Hollywood and unfortunately developed a horrible drug habit that kind of even led to his decline before that. But the first couple of movies he made during the 1970s are magical, and they're examples of a man who just really wanted to make a statement, have commentary, make movies with beautiful moments, magical moments that really make you think. And nothing really encapsulates him at his youngest and brightest than Harold and Maude. Harold and Maude, so many issues. Like, he did tackle a lot of issues in this movie. Basically, like, you're living your life to the fullest. Love knowing no boundaries. It was a criticism of psychology, of how we didn't really understand mental health, the inevitability of aging and death. He touches on the Holocaust, how parents put a lot of expectations on their kids, and all of these issues are tackled in a absolutely beautifully directed and shot movie.
And time. All right, Jeremy, back over to you. Opening minute.
Yes, John very well spoke about Hal Ashby. He was a great editor in the 60s, worked with filmmaker Norman Jewison a lot, and then started directing films. Like he said, the first couple out of the gate kind of put Hal on the map, but throughout the 70s, that meteoric rise continued, and he made one really great notable film after another. And I think all of this culminated at the end of the decade in the film Being There, which came out in 1979, which I think built on everything that Hal had been working on in his earlier films, the social commentary, the humor, the wry kind of odd characters. This film starred Peter Sellers, the well-known comedic actor from Dr. Strangelove and, of course, the Pink Panther franchise. And what I think is his greatest performance, his most subtle, funny, just affecting role in the story about a man who is mistaken for a genius. And it's a film about politics, about the wealthy, about so much in our society. And it's just a great comedy and a great statement. I'll get more into the plot.
All right, so we have Harold and Maude versus Being There. With that said, John, we're going to go back over to you. 2 minutes to continue. Time starts when you speak.
Again, when we talk about Hal Ashby, we want to talk about this parabolic career that he had. And yes, Jeremy's 100% right. He built on, Harold and Maude, Shampoo, Last Detail, all these great movies, built up to Being There. And at that point in time, Hal Ashby started to peel away a lot of the stuff that made Hal Ashby special. And really, Being There hangs on Peter Sellers' performance, which is a great performance. And it's really the centerpiece of the movie. And it really isn't so much Hal Ashby. Like, I can even go into the details as much as Hal Ashby in Harold and Maude and Shampoo and Coming Home and all these movies, curated a really beautiful soundtrack. Like he'd find artists of the day in the 70s, and he would pick songs specifically for the movie. But by the time 1979 rolled around, he had already gotten into the excesses of Hollywood. He developed a cocaine habit, unfortunately. And a lot of these details, these special magical details Hal Ashby put into his movies fell away. There is no curated soundtrack in Being There. It really is just, I don't want to say it's a one-note movie because it is a great movie. Peter Sellers is fantastic in this movie. But that really is the beginning and the end of this movie. In fact, the movie itself has a framework where Peter Sellers is a character that everything he knows, he learns from watching television. He's a very sheltered existence. And the framework and the rules of the movie is based that he should know things he saw on TV. So there's a very complicated scene at the end when his friend dies and he starts crying. So he does understand the concept of death, but he doesn't understand how a dinner place setting works, how an elevator works, how to feed himself, clothe himself, like all these things he doesn't know. So it's a very confusing movie when you stop and think about it. And also it's a really easy target. He targets American politics, and we're talking after Watergate. So everybody was taking shots at American politics at the time. All the commentary in the earlier movies, like Harold and Maude tackles mental health, tackles love, tackles like a April, October romance. The Last Detail tackles our military in the time of Vietnam. Shampoo, it was a critique of the suburbs. Being There was kind of where Hal Ashby started to coast. It shows, and really we cannot hang an entire movie on Peter Sellers' performance. Harold and Maude has two great performances. I think Ruth Gordon's better than Peter Sellers. And
all right, we're going to go back over to you, Jeremy. 2 minutes on the clock, when ready.
Well, I will actually say I have the opposite viewpoint of John here in terms of Hal Ashby and his voice as a filmmaker. I think that, whatever was going on in his personal life, John seems to hang a lot on that. That is something that you can conjecture about outside of the films. But if we look at Being There, this is a film that is so focused. It's got a theme. It's got a character. Everything in the movie ties together. And I think that the whole movie has all of Ashby's skills in terms of, no, it isn't just Peter Sellers. This is probably the greatest cast of any of his films. Shirley MacLaine, Melvin Douglas, Richard Dysart, and Jack Warden playing the president are an incredible cast. I think each of them give a lot of nuance to their characters that the characters in earlier films like Harold and Maude don't have. They're more archetypal characters. I think Being There it's a work. Yes, this man is a simple guy who gets mistaken for being, this wise guy, and he gets propelled into this political framework. And I think that it is kind of absurd, but it also really kind of makes sense when you watch it. And it took the skill that Hal Ashby had developed to get there to really bring it across. And I think that I would argue Harold and Maude actually is a younger filmmaker who's still finding his voice, and he's kind of leaning on other filmmakers. I think that Harold and Maude is very derivative of The Graduate and other films like that. It's got a young guy who's college age, who doesn't know what he wants to do. It's got a trendy soundtrack. They had Simon and Garfunkel in The Graduate. So now they get Cat Stevens, who it seems kind of random in the movie. Like, yes, it's got Cat Stevens songs. I don't know exactly what we're supposed to think from that, but that was the style at the time. And I think, like Harold's uncle character, his mother, they're not very well-established actors. It's really all hangs on the two leading characters, as opposed to Being There, which has a great cast all the way through, top to bottom.
And time. All right, we're going to go into the 4-minute open discussion. As always, a reminder to the players, while you are fighting for time and points, do give each other a chance to breathe, get some points in there, and have a nice back and forth. As always, you guys are good at this. You'll feel it out. The timer will start when the first competitor speaks.
I just wanted to say that, you talked about all the thematic elements in Harold and Maude, but I think that Harold and Maude it's a young filmmaker who's just kind of thrown it all in there. You've got a story about a young guy who stages his own suicide over and over. That's the thing going on. You've got the story with the older woman. You've got a military subplot, all of this different stuff, and that I think he was just kind of throwing together. And there's different themes. Some of them kind of connect, but it's a younger filmmaker who's still kind of trying to figure it out. And I think that Being There, it's all very well connected. It's a theme about how people misunderstand what's important, what's inspirational. It's all those easy talking points. And this guy who's only ever watched TV and hasn't lived a life is able to throw out these talking points, talk about gardening, and everyone misunderstands him. And I think it all
I do
is
think
so connected in everything that the characters do.
Yeah, you're making a great point, Jeremy, but I do think it winds up being a very easy target. The American government's a pretty easy target at that point. All these people that misinterpret them are Illuminati type government types, and just fact that they are just simply looking for the best optics in the community. It's a pretty easy subject to tackle. You are right. He is idealistic. It's a young filmmaker's perspective in Harold and Maude, but he makes very poignant points. Like the fact that like Harold is clearly depressed, but like even like psychiatrists, they take him to a psychiatrist, they understand it. They take him to the military character, the uncle, who actually is a pretty well-developed character. It's definitely a caricature of a man who's, he has the one arm, he's given his arm to his country. It's a mockery of people that, are over patriotism. The mother is also a very well-developed character, a vapid, rich housewife who just basically ignores her son. That is why he's making these suicide attempts, and which are actually beautifully shot things. The scene where he immolates himself in front of his date is so well shot, and I would put that shot, the magic of that shot, up against anything in Being There. The only really clever shot in Being There is the final shot where he walks on water for some reason. And Harold and Maude has that. Harold and Maude has the car going off the cliff. He takes risks in Harold and Maude. There's risky cinematography. There's risky shots. Being There is basically, you are just basically watching Peter Sellers walk the entire movie. And like I said, it is a fantastic performance. But you're right. He is an older filmmaker, but it's older in a bad way. He's peeling away everything that's exciting. The soundtrack, the cinematography, even the performances, which you say are layered, they are long and like they do talk a lot, but really none of them are realistic, and they do create a framework early on in the movie where he basically explains why he is the way he is, but they don't even stick to that framework. So for a man who cut his teeth in editing, it's not edited in a way that makes any sense given the rules that are set up early on in the movie.
Well, I would say that he is absolutely a better filmmaker when he makes Being There, because the thematic element that he's dealing with is handled beautifully. You keep saying it's an easy target, attacking the military and everything. Maybe it is, but it isn't treated in an easy way. It's a very subtle film. Like nobody is that caricature that we saw of the military man in Harold and Maude.
There were movies like criticizing the government for years before.
We're seeing these people. They're intelligent people, but we see how they get thrown off, how they get deceived, and it's in a really funny, subtle way. And he doesn't have to resort to his earlier filmmaking techniques that hits you over the head. And there's a lot of great imagery in Being There. I think a lot of the imagery is more through the performances, the scenes. The scene with Shirley MacLaine. If you take the sex scene in Harold and Maude and compare it to the one in Being There, there's so much more subtlety and grace when she's like, what do you like with sex? And he's like thinking about TV. He's like, I like to watch. And I would
argue that's more pivotal to the plot, where the sex scene in Harold and Maude just needed to be there. It's not pivotal to the plot, whereas he looking at the television and copying the television, which is weird.
I think it's pivotal to the themes and the mood of the film, whereas the Harold and Maude one is just kind of, it just has to be in there. It's thrown in there.
And time. All right. We're going to go into the final minute of the round. John, you are up first. Time starts when you begin speaking.
What it's all going to boil down to is, I'd argue, if we're going to talk about what movies are derivative of what, like if you want to see a movie about a simple man who is misunderstood and rises to power, watch Forrest Gump. Don't watch Being There, because Forrest Gump did it better. Harold and Maude, for all of its subtleties and all of the themes it's done, Harold and Maude has never been replicated. Harold and Maude is a critique of mental health. It's a critique of parents putting pressure on their children. It's an April-October romance. It touches on so many themes. There is so much heart in this film, like the way it's shot, the way it's scored. Being There is mailed in. He is at the plateau of his career at that point. Everything that comes after Being There, you don't want to watch. Like, this is Hal Ashby at the start of his decline. You want to see Hal Ashby as a bright-eyed, idealistic man who is trying to put his best foot forward. Harold and Maude is a love letter to filmmaking. Harold and Maude is just the shot of the car going off the cliff. Just the shot of every shot where Harold tries to commit suicide, fakes his suicide. These are beautiful shots. Nothing in Being There touches.
And time. All right, Jeremy, you have the final minute. Time starts when you begin speaking.
If you just take the final shots, Harold driving his car off of a cliff after he's processing the death of Maud, and then playing the banjo. It's whimsical. It's kind of like that early 70s, let's just do kind of a whimsical ending. Being there, the scene, the final shot of Peter Sellers after they're talking about maybe making him the president, and he goes off into the garden and then he walks on water like a Jesus figure, has been puzzled over by critics for years. People are trying to dissect what that means. And that's what's so great about this film. This is not a filmmaker who is mailing it in. There's subtlety in the humor. There's subtlety in the storytelling. It isn't just, let's throw it all out there. It works much better. And Forrest Gump, to me, is a blatant kind of movie, whereas Being There is a movie you can watch over and over and over and get more and more out of the comedy, out of Peter Sellers' genius, where he had been so blunt in previous films. And Harold and Maude, if you want to talk about derivative, The Graduate did the mental health stuff and everything that it did previously.
And time. All right, solid start, guys. I think you figured it out pretty quickly there. I'm going to go ahead and put you in the back, and we will bring the judges in for the deliberation. Zach, I go to you as concise as you can get it for me. Who gets your vote, and what will be the selling point?
I will say this was a very back and forth match, but overall, I went with John more because he said Harold and Maude was more risky, and also I felt like he had better counters against Being There, so that's why I went with John.
Okay, Alec, I go down to you for your vote.
I went Jeremy. I think Jeremy was able to explain better how Ashby was a better director by the time he got to Being There over Harold and Maude.
All right, which means Jake will go to you for the split vote. Who gets it?
I also have John on this one. Again, better counters, like Zach said.
Okay, all right. And if anybody at home is worried the judges sound a little robotic tonight, that is due to a time constraint on the recording. And so I've asked them. You guys did beautifully there. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and jump into question number 2 here. And we're going to be moving over to a man who is already having a hell of a year in Jonathan Majors. He was a part of the cast of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which, say what you will about the reviews of the film and your thoughts on the film, it is the highest opening weekend of any Ant-Man film. It was the first film to open at over 100 million in the year 2022, and it certainly kicked off the box office, continuing the trend of what has been a more positive year than the last couple years in film. And this week, as the match is releasing in just a couple of days, he is going to be the co-star of Creed 3 alongside Michael B. Jordan, which begs the question, as this up-and-coming actor is now hopping on the train of and joining all these franchises, when you look back at the last few years of his career, which have largely been filled with indie films, what Jonathan Majors film should get a sequel is the question. When you're looking at his career and all the great films he's done, which one should get a sequel? And I think these guys have picked not only 2 great options, but arguably 2 of the more underseen options of these films. Some good picks here. Jeremy, you are up first on this one, so the timer will start for you when you begin speaking.
I say if you're going to answer the question of what Jonathan Majors' film should get a sequel, I would say go to the man himself. When press was being done about the film that I'm talking about, he said, I absolutely want to stay in this world and keep making these films. I'd love to explore the material before the first film in a prequel. And that film that I'm talking about is The Harder They Fall, which came out in 2021. Directed by musician and filmmaker Jim Samwell. This is a film with a largely black cast, black people behind the film, the crew, and it's kind of a Western that has a lot of bravado, a lot of personality. It really harkens back to the spaghetti Westerns of the 60s and 70s. It has an awesome soundtrack, and of course, Jonathan Majors. I think this is where he announces himself as a movie star, as this guy who's on a revenge quest in the Old West against the great Idris Elba. And the movie is awesome, but it leaves it off with a lot of possibilities. And I think everybody'd love to see more.
Time. All right, John, over to you.
My pick's a little different. I picked a movie that is very indie. it has a ton of like plot things that are just hanging at the end of the movie. I'm going to talk about Jungle Land. It's probably a movie that you haven't seen. In this movie, Jonathan Majors is not a main character. He is a criminal boss, minor character in the movie. But the way the movie finishes, I feel it leaves the sequel wide open for Jonathan Majors to come into the sequel and be the big bad in the sequel. The main villain in the movie does get killed by one of the main characters. In the two brothers, one brother is a fighter who has clearly suffered physical disability, mental disability from being a bare knuckle boxer. Charlie Hunnam plays his older brother, his caretaker. They get in debt to the mob, which is run by that in the Boston area by Jonathan Majors, and they're tasked with going out to Reno to deliver a pregnant prostitute to the other mob boss in Reno who had knocked her up. It's all about the struggles getting across the country to get to Jungle Land, which is this bare knuckle boxing tournament where they're going to try to win to pay back the debts they have to Jonathan Majors' character. And I'll get into all the stuff that we can do in the sequel because there's a ton of stuff.
And time. Absolutely. They're talking about potential sequels. There's a lot to explain here. They'll have 2 minutes to try and get it out what they can. Jeremy, back over to you when ready.
I do think you have to put a little bit of realism into these arguments. Yeah, as John admitted himself, Jungle Land is an indie film. It's a small film. It was a little seen. The Harder They Fall is a film that did unfortunately get released on Netflix, but it had a lot more exposure. It was reviewed by many more critics. It had, more people saw it on Netflix when it was on there. And I think it has the enthusiasm of the filmmakers behind it. James Samuel himself has said, I always imagined this as a trilogy. He says he has a lot he wants to do to play in the world, this awesome world where the Black people in the Old West are badasses and they're not hamstrung by, what we would assume in a Western environment. It's almost like an alternate world where they just are running around and totally kicking ass, and they have their own gangs. There is some basis in reality. There is a real life character named Bass Reeves in the film, played by Delroy Lindo. So there are some connections that they're drawing on there, but it is so stylish and well done. In the first film, it tells a wonderful, story about how Jonathan Majors is on a revenge quest against the guy who killed his parents. And then, spoilers, he finds out that guy was in fact his brother, and he was taking revenge against his own father. So that story is fully told, but it does leave off with now that mission is fulfilled. He's got all this anger inside of him still. What is he going to do with the rest of his life? He rides off with his girl. So there's a lot more they could do. There's a villain played by Regina King who's still out there that might come after them. She's awesome in the movie. There's a great hand-to-hand fight with her and Zazie Beetz, who plays the female lead. So there could be a great sequel going on there, but with the talk of a prequel, Majors himself said, we didn't see this guy previous to 33 when he was making his bones. There's a lot we could do there. And I think of, how these movies kind of remind me of the Red Dead Redemption games. I could see him going like down south, having like an awesome villain, like maybe a Pedro Pascal to fight against. There's so much you can do in this world, and the enthusiasm of the crew is there.
All right, John, back over to you.
I think the real downfall of making a sequel or a prequel to The Harder They Fall is just the mythology of The Harder They Fall themselves. Like, you have Nat Love is a great character, but Nat Love is defined by the fact that as a child he was attacked by Idris Elba and the Scorpion character who carved a cross into his forehead. And his entire life, if you listen to the actual dialogue of the movie, his entire life has been consumed by revenge against those two people. So there is no prequel because it starts with him killing the Scorpion. It ends with him killing Idris Elba. Those are the two men who killed his mother, killed his father, carved a cross into his forehead. The entire movie is encapsulated as a revenge film, and we see the entirety of Nat's journey. There is nothing after it. There is nothing before it. He promises his Zazie Beetz' character that once he kills Rufus King, that's the end of it. Or whatever his name, Rufus Buck. Once he kills Rufus Buck, that is the end of it, that they can finally be together. For him to do anything after that would violate the rule he placed for himself so he could be with Zazie Beetz' character. And we also developed so many great characters in The Harder They Fall that are killed. Rufus Buck, Cherokee Bill, Jim Beckworth, Bill Pickett, Wiley Esco, Monroe Grimes. All these characters are developed throughout the course of an over 2-hour movie, and they're all killed. To do that all over again and violate all the rules of the universe, even though we kind of want to see more of this universe, it would cheapen the movie. Jungleland, however, ends on like a high note. It ends. Jungleland has just started. Jack O'Connell, Lion, has only fought one fight. The man that he was supposed to deliver Sky to, Yates, is dead. So now there's a power vacuum in the mob world. We know Pepper, Jonathan Major's character, is the underboss. He's going to come into Reno and take over the thing. They still owe the money to him. Stanley is in jail. So now if Stanley's in jail, that means Pepper's going to have leverage against Lion that he needs to keep fighting. This tournament literally just starts when the movie ends. There's a continuation. Plus, if you want to talk about prequels, we were hinted at a bunch of stuff in Jungleland. We're hinted like, when did Lion learn he was good at fighting? When did he develop his injuries that Stanley had to take care of him? Like, we hear about their abusive childhood. Let's see it. How did they meet Pepper? Why does Pepper treat them so well, even though he's a vicious mob boss? We don't know any of that stuff.
And time. All right, we're going to go into the 4-minute open discussion. The timer starts back up when the first competitor speaks.
Can you pitch to me like a Harder They Fall prequel or sequel that doesn't violate any of the rules that they've set up in the Harder They Fall? Because I think that'd be pretty difficult.
I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at, but if the point that you're making is that the rule of the Harder They Fall is that his entire existence is linked to Rufus Buck and his revenge, and once he kills him, his story is over, is totally flawed because he is going on this whole mission on a complete misunderstanding. He does not know that he's Rufus Buck's brother and that he has become the person that Rufus Buck was. He is, in fact, Rufus Buck and doesn't even realize it. He screams,
but he hasn't created that. He hasn't created that love.
Yeah. So at the end of the movie, he is like, now he's got a new perception of who he is, and everything that it took in those years for him to become that person. We didn't, like you're saying in Jungleland, we didn't see him become a boxer. We didn't see him become a badass fighter. To see that would be awesome, and to see all those awesome characters. How did he meet those characters that are dead? That would be a great prequel. And then to follow it in the third movie, yeah, I'm not who I thought I was. I need to find my identity there. There's so much open in that world for him.
I do think that Nat Love, while it seemingly is, he's definitely a badass character. He is a very simple character. He is revenge driven. He has promised Stagecoach Mary that I will be with you. I am no longer a violent man, so we can be together. The reason why we were not together is because I was off traveling the world trying to find my revenge, and now we can finally be together. She gives her heart to him. Like, if the movie's just going to be him like going back on a bunch of promises, I'm not interested in that world. I am interested in what happens to Lion and Stanley. I am interested in, does Stanley survive prison? Does Lion keep going into Jungleland? What threats does Pepper have? What happens to Sky? Can Sky take Stanley's role? There's a ton of questions in Jungleland that I want to see. If I have the questions I have about the Harder They Fall answered, I'm let down by Nat Love. Nat Love is not the man who I thought he was. He made promises in the Harder They Fall that he's going to be violated if we do a sequel. It's not as awesome as it would be, as awesome as the action would be, as great as the characters might be. And they killed a ton of great characters that can't come back.
Prequel. See those characters again?
As younger people,
so here's the thing.
I'm not interested
in he made promises, but he's a complex character. He was wrong to make those promises. He didn't understand himself, and there was a lot of other stuff that he did to become that guy, to become badass. Meeting all those friends, that is really more of who he was. He just didn't realize it. He thought that his be-all, end-all was the revenge, but in reality, his friendships and his relationship with Zazie Beetz, that's really who he is. That's what he realizes at the end. That's what we can follow through in the third movie. You talk about how it's a complete story. I think your film, Jungleland, is a complete story. This is a story about two brothers, one that keeps letting the other brother down, and it gets to the end where they have the boxing match and everything, and the police come in, and the brother takes the fall for the other brother. It completes that relationship. It completes that journey. And if you talk about Jonathan Majors, like what is he going to be impassioned to do? To do one of his early roles where he had a small role as like a drug dealer, he's going to come back and do that again? Or is he going to continue on this great epic journey?
Plenty of indie movies have sequels. I mean, Jonathan Major's character, like, he could definitely do more. And you know that in a real life organized crime scenario, he would definitely move in and take Yates's territory. As the underboss, he would move right in. All of Yates's men are dead. Reno is wide open for the East Coast to come in. They still owe him all that money. They owe him like tens of thousands of dollars, and he has Lion in a position where Stanley's in prison. He could leverage that against him, and he knows the truth about Sky. There's a lot of intrigue here that could be explored in Jungle Land Part 2.
I just think that
is going to be damaged by a sequel.
It's a lot of plot stuff. The character stories are really followed through. Pepper, played by Jonathan Majors, didn't have much of a character. There isn't much for him to go back to there.
All right. So as we go into the final minute, I'm going to make an audible call here speaking to the judges. Though the wording of the question does specifically say prequel, because both competitors have given concepts for prequels as well, and neither have disregarded the idea thus far in the debate, I'm going to ask that the judges do not disregard anything that they have said about prequels. We'll look at it as continuation in any sense. So therefore, the judgment should be based on just what they've said in general and not on a technicality of what has been said. Because there were not any ground rules established in that sense prior, and neither have tried to disregard it. Just wanted to make sure everything's above board there. That said, though, you do have 1 minute left to finish off the round. Jeremy, you're up first when you begin speaking.
Yeah, Jungle Land it's a fine indie boxing movie. It had a story to tell. It told its story. One brother competed in a fight and he proved himself. The other brother took the fall for his brother who he had been mistreating, went to jail. It's a good, story. We've kind of seen it before with movies like Warrior. I don't feel like I need to see more of that. But The Harder They Fall is a movie that it's got a voice. It's got something to say. It's a movie that we need. So many Black movies are like in the ghetto, or they're like stereotypical. This was a movie where somebody who wanted to make a Western with his voice, with these great actors. There are other actors that weren't able to be in this film because of COVID, that they could bring back in more films. It's a film that, like I said, Jonathan Majors himself wants to play. He obviously sees something more in this character. He obviously knows that in the days before, he had fallen in love. He had had all these other facets to himself. He had sublimated that for revenge. But now that story's over and he knows more who he is, he can go forward and explore an awesome story and kick-ass action.
All right, John, final minute on the clock when ready.
I would argue that this question says which Jonathan Majors film should get a sequel. I think that the world they created in The Harder They Fall is beautiful and magical. And that world can exist without the storyline of Nat Love, because Nat Love's story starts and ends in The Harder They Fall. He is born, he grows up in a family, his family is attacked, a cross is carved in his forehead. He lives his life of revenge and promises to give it up to marry Stagecoach Mary. That's it. If this director wants to make another movie in that world that is not a sequel to The Harder They Fall, I'm here for that, because the style of that movie is freaking awesome. But Nat Love's story is over. Look at the mythology of that movie. You cannot do a prequel. You cannot do a sequel. That's the story. Do another movie where Nat Love's a character, but it can't be a sequel to The Harder They Fall. Jungle Land leaves us on a cliffhanger. It begs for a sequel. Stanley goes to jail. He's in huge trouble. Lion hasn't won this tournament yet. They still owe Pepper a ton of money. They just killed a huge mob boss in Reno. Sky is now the caretaker of Lion. Like, there is stuff, and plus we know nothing about the past. I'd love to see it. Give me a sequel.
And time. All right. Another great round, guys. I'll go ahead and sit you in the back and bring in our judges for the decision. Alec, I go up to you first. Who gets your vote, and what was the main selling point?
I went with Jeremy because I think he was able to kind of tear down every single one of every one of John's knocks against his film, and was able to attack John's. And John, I think, focused too much on attacking Jeremy's. That I don't think he defended his enough.
Okay. All right. Tato, down to you. Same question.
I also have Jeremy on this one. He answered John's questions very efficiently, and the fact that Majors wants it also plays in.
All right. Thank you guys so much. I'll go ahead and sit you in the back and bring the competitors back in, as we are going to go ahead and jump into question number 3 of this matchup. And as we are heading into this, at least at the upload, we are 1 week away from the Academy Awards, give or take a few days. This is a midweek upload, but somebody who could potentially have a big light shown on them once again at the Oscars is Mr. Steven Spielberg, who is obviously up for a number of awards with his film The Fabelmans. And last year he was up for West Side Story. Obviously, plenty of other years he has been up for tons of numerous films. I think we have all shoveled enough praise onto the man who is Steven Spielberg. But what about the films that didn't get that praise? And did any of them deserve them? The question is, What is the most underrated Steven Spielberg film? And we'll go ahead and get back into this. John, you are up first, so the timer will start for you once you begin speaking.
I think my pick isn't a surprise some people. I'm talking about a movie that has a 29% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm talking about a movie that Steven Spielberg in interviews to this day says he doesn't really like the movie. He feels he did not do a good job on this movie. However, every person I talk to about this movie loves this movie because over the test of time, audiences have tripled that Rotten Tomatoes score. It's close to 80%, it's 76% Rotten Tomatoes in the audience. What movie am I talking about that Steven Spielberg hates and that every critic hated coming out? I'm talking about Hook, which is so weird to me to say out loud. Like, people were not ready for a new narrative in the Peter Pan universe. People were not ready to change what J.M. Barrie did. People rejected outright that Steven Spielberg would come in and just do his Spielbergy, syrupy thing and just do like a melodramatic an add-on of the Peter Pan universe, and it was hated. Like, I didn't even realize it was this hated. You could go on and see some of the things the critics said about this movie, some of the things they said about Steven Spielberg that are still affecting him to this day. I didn't realize Hook was this underrated, but it's really an underrated movie.
And time. All right, Jeremy, back over to you.
I'm going to tell you a little story. In 1974, Steven Spielberg was making the film Jaws, and him and one of his main actors, Richard Dreyfuss, kind of bonded during a very tough shoot by quoting a movie to each other. This was a movie from 1943 called A Guy Named Joe. This is an old Hollywood romantic fantasy film that was one of the films that inspired Steven Spielberg to become a filmmaker. And so at some point during the shoot, Spielberg and Dreyfuss said, one day we want to remake that movie and we're going to do it together because that'll be an awesome passion project for both of us. And lo and behold, 15 years later, in 1989, they made the film Always, which is a movie that I think of all of Spielberg's films, if you're going to say titles, most people are like, Always, what's that? This is one that really kind of fell through the cracks. It's one of the very few romantic films that Spielberg's made. I think it's a wonderful homage to old Hollywood cinema. It did okay with the critics, all right in theaters, but I think it's ready for a rediscovery.
And time. All right, so we have Hook versus Always. John, back over to you. 1 minute or 2 minutes on the clock. Excuse me.
Again, remember, we're talking about what's the most underrated Steven Spielberg film. I'd say Always is pretty much correctly rated. Rotten Tomatoes, critic score 65, audience 60. Everyone I've talked about this movie, they like this movie. They have nothing bad to really say about the movie. It's a fine movie. It falls into all the familiar Steven Spielberg notes. It's very fantastic. It's cute. It's syrupy. It makes you feel good. That's really about it. There's nothing bad to say about it, but it's not like an exceptional movie, especially in the pantheon of Steven Spielberg movies. And the funny thing is, we're both talking about movies that came out around the same time. These movies are only 2 years apart. So obviously Steven Spielberg hit like a lull and where he was just mailing it in for a few years. And people tend to notice that. But let me tell you a little bit more about Always. Audrey Hepburn's last performance, she's probably the best thing about the movie. She's only in like 2 or 3 scenes. She kills it, and it's sad to see her in the last role just play an angel. It's very ironic. And that's probably the most, that'll pull on your heartstrings. I'll give you that. That doesn't make a movie underrated though. It just makes it kind of like whimsical. It's a fantasy movie, not a lot of fantasy in it. There's some fantastical aspects. A lot of the stuff just comes off as corny and cliche. And the second you start watching this movie, you know exactly what's going to happen. There's this weird dance scene where like Holly Hunter gets this really gaudy, like out of place white dress. And of course, all the grimy workers want to dance with her, but they all have messy hands. So all of a sudden, Richard Dreyfuss' character has a bunch of towels for no reason. Nobody would ever just sitting there with a bunch of towels and they're all wiping their hands off and they all dance with her. And there's the reliance on these guys have oil on their hands to do so many sight gags in this movie to the point that like John Goodman has a Hitler mustache. Maybe in bad taste, but there's so many oil jokes in this movie that it's just drummed to death. I would not say the movie is underrated per se because of that. However, when we look at Hook, all you remember about Hook is like how perfect was Robin Williams being casted as the adult version of a boy who never wanted to grow up, who then rediscovers he is the adult version of a boy that never wanted to grow up. Robin Williams was made to be that character. Dustin Hoffman, I believe, was probably made to be Captain Hook. Julia Roberts was made to be Tinkerbell. These were great casting decisions at the time, panned by critics, appreciated later. That's underrated.
And time. All right, Jeremy, back over to you. Time starts when you begin speaking.
I think we're just having a difference of like definitions and stuff here, John, because in my mind, Hook is absolutely one of Spielberg's most overrated films. Let's just look at it qualitatively. Like you said, the critics didn't like it. Spielberg himself feels like what he was trying to do with that film didn't come across. It's a movie that I think was made a little early in terms of the visuals. Like if it had been made later on, the flying and everything with the Lost Boys, I think could have been done a lot better. It's so set bound. It feels like it's just stuck on a set. And, you talk about the great cast, but Robin Williams has to kind of hold back his charisma for more than half the movie. Bob Hoskins plays this great character, Smee, but he doesn't get a lot to do. Julia Roberts is really kind of miscast and really not very good as Tinkerbell in the film. And so, okay, why is it overrated then? Because there was an expression that a film critic had about films. Was it great or were you 8? And I think Hook is one of the greatest examples of this. A lot of 90s kids watched Hook. It kind of, it had these Lost Boys that were kind of like, they were into like extreme sports. They were skateboarding and all this stuff. And it hit in a lot of fantasies of kids at that time, and it stuck with them. And they love this movie. And now they're in their 30s and everything from the past gets canonized. So a lot of people are overrating this movie. Oh, Hook's so great because I loved it when I was 8 years old. What an awesome movie. Robin Williams was Peter Pan. Yeah, but he isn't Peter Pan until the end of the movie. And when he finally flies and fights and everything, it's really not well done. The effects don't hold up. But, if we look at Always, this is a film that Spielberg was passionate to make. I think all the stuff you're talking about with the sight gags is charming. That's very old Hollywood. It's slapstick comedy. It works in this film. And I think that this film is so well tailored to get to an emotional ending that really works with the romance of it all.
And time. All right, we're going to go into the 4-minute open discussion. Timer starts back up when the first competitor speaks.
Is the emotional?
I just want to continue with what I was saying there.
Okay.
Yeah, Always, it's a finely tuned, it's an old Hollywood, sentimental, hokey kind of movie, but we know this was coming at a time when we needed those movies, and I think we still need them. And I think it's totally well calibrated in doing that. I think Richard Dreyfuss.
Yeah, I agree that it's hokey, but it also leans into cringy. Like the whole Hitler mustache thing is cringy. The whole message that
there's not cringe humor in Hook.
Hey, but that's
way more cringe humor in Hook.
Aimed at children. Always is a movie for adults. There's also the message of Always. The message of Always is Richard Dreyfuss dies, and basically he has to give Holly Hunter permission to move on. Hey, ladies, even if your man is dead, he has to give you permission to move on to the next romantic stage of your life. That's a horrible message. This movie's rated.
I don't think so. I think it's easy to say that, but I think the message that these two people were deeply in love with each other, and there is a process when you let that person go, and then to have the idea that after death you haven't let go either, and it's the story of how these two people let each other go. And I think the final climax, the plane climax where she's in the plane and he helps her is really thrilling. It's great Spielberg filmmaking, as opposed to the climax of Hook. The climax of Hook
he's
is
gonna die.
So
this guy's gonna die. There's the whole plot is just, it's very derivative and predictable.
Yeah, but they're great actors, and Holly Hunter and Richard Dreyfuss are so great.
But give me a good story for these actors to be in.
Thing and
Hook,
bring
at
so
least,
much
is a retelling. You don't know how they're going to get from A to B in Hook. Hook, Peter Pan's going to beat Captain Hook, but you don't know how he's going to get there. Yes, is it like the fact that they have to explain how he goes from this guy to Peter Pan? Yes, of course. But that's the whole story. It is a reimagining of it because Peter Pan was never supposed to grow up. What happens if he does grow up? It answers a question that people wanted to know about. And of course, the critics hated it because it messed with Peter Pan, and it has that aura over it that even Steven Spielberg can't shake.
Hook is basically a retelling of Peter Pan. It is they go to Neverland. There's the Lost Boys rally. They have to fight Captain Hook. Yeah, it's got those extra elements thrown in, but you're following that same framework of a story, and it just doesn't work because the battles at the end. It's like, does the movie want to be a real movie? You're
defending an actual retelling of another movie against my movie. You said your movie's a remake of another.
Yeah, it's a remake. It's a throwback.
Wouldn't it be?
But
that'd be a moot point.
It works better. It's better done remake as opposed to Hook. Or you're saying it's different, but there's some different touches. But it's such a clash of tones.
Always is the kind of movie that parody movies make fun of, where he's screaming "I love you" over the propeller, but she can't hear him. "I love you, I love you." So this guy's gonna die. Even when he does die, like it's the weirdest death scene where he's just like, That
I
is
love
not
that
how
scene.
anybody would react to their plane exploding. It's really unrealistic.
He's been doing this for years and years. He's a daredevil. He's been pushing it too far, and at the end, he's like, "Oh my God, it's a wonderful Hollywoody moment." But to get back to what I was saying about Hook, the ending, the big battle, and everything is so ridiculous. It's so little kiddie.
It's
the kid
very
is like
early
turns
90s.
into an actual
It's exactly
ball
for the time.
and rolls down a hill. But then you've got really serious stuff with Dustin Hoffman and Robin Williams. There's such a clash of tones. Kids remember that stuff. They remember the skateboarding stuff, and they idealize this movie, but it doesn't really work as a movie. Always is very solid.
They remember plenty more. Robin Williams, even before he becomes Peter Pan and when he becomes Peter Pan, you can treat them as two separate performances. He really commits to the fact that he's this reluctant Peter Pan or a non-existent Peter Pan or whatever, a brainwashed, Jason Bourne type Peter Pan. Then he becomes Peter Pan. We get two separate, really brilliant Robin Williams performances. Dustin Hoffman is brilliant as Captain Hook. You're right. Bob Hoskins is also brilliant as Smee, and he is on screen a lot. He's as good as Smee as the original Smee and Peter Pan. There's so many great characters, great costumes, great sets, great score. Both these movies have great scores. That's a tie, but great scores. Whereas Always is just
time. All right, so we're going to go into the final minute. John, you're up first. Time starts when you begin speaking.
Is a movie that nobody really knows about, and then when you watch it, you realize what nobody really knows about it underrated? No, it's rated perfectly fine. Hook, I defy you to go read what these critics were saying about Hook. If they had their way, this movie would be just shelved away in existence. Even Steven Spielberg is like personally affected by the reviews that Hook got. He believes the negative hype that Hook got. They're like, oh, he just mailed it in. Oh, he could have done better. And maybe he could have. But the movie, just like Jeremy said, it is full of nostalgia. And we do remember it. The critics, the adults at the time hated this movie, but people have come to appreciate over time. When you look at the aggregate audience score, that is not an entirety of people who are now 40, 50 years old. That is an aggregate of everybody who has watched this movie, rating it 3 times higher than critics rated it. There is a lot to like about Hook. There are a lot of great jokes. It is a perfect family film. When you think about family film, something you can show to your kids and go like, this is a great story. Look at Robin Williams. Look at this treasure we lost. It is a great Robin Williams performance, and it is a totally underrated Steven Spielberg film, given the critics.
And time. All right. Jeremy, back over to you.
I'm thinking of underrated films, and I'm seeing two different things here. One of them is, let's go back and watch a movie that I saw when I was a kid and watch and enjoy that again. And then you watch Hook and you realize, it's really not that good. Like Robin Williams is great, but the movie gives him, he has to be this stuffed shirt for most of it. And then when he finally does become Peter Pan, the movie lets him down. The scenes are ridiculous. The effects are bad. I don't agree that the sets are that great in that movie. I think it's very brown. I think it obviously is sets. It doesn't have the reality of being in a good fantasy world. The movie's very dated. You're going to be like, oh, the skateboarding. It's so 1991. It's so dated. But, wait, what's this movie I've never heard of? Always. Let's go back and watch this one. Oh, my God, this is such a good Spielberg movie. It's an old Hollywood throwback, but it's got a great romance. You care about the characters. He tells it solidly. There's that one Hitler joke, but overall it's not dated. It's timeless. It's a story that you can get invested in, the romance and the love, and really be touched by it. And you haven't seen it before.
All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and sit you in the back and bring the judges in for their deliberation. Jake, I go to you first. Who gets your vote, and what was the main selling point?
I got John on this one simply because I heard more about the actual ratings from him.
Okay. Zach, I go down to you.
I actually went with Jeremy more because he sold his movie more while giving better counters, I think, against Hook.
Okay, which means, Alec, I go over to you. Who gets your vote, and what was the main selling point?
I went with John. I think he argued the semantics of the argument maybe a little bit better.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. I'm going to go ahead and put you in the back, and then we'll bring the competitors back in, and we will move on to question number 4 in this matchup. And we are going to be moving on from one director who I think arguably is one of the seminal points of old Hollywood. And we're going to be moving on to a director who, at least in the last couple of years, has become a seminal point in new Hollywood, especially once he took over the Godzilla franchise. Adam Wingard spent most of the 2010s being somewhat of a certainly at the start indie, and then continuing to elevate into a more mainstream horror director. But he really hit the big time when he took over the Godzilla Kong franchise, the MonsterVerse, because he is the first director that actually gets to direct a sequel. They've had 4 entries so far, 4 different directors. He's the first one that they've trusted to come back for a sequel, and arguably because he made the best film in the franchise. But we're not going to be focusing on his films. We're going to be focusing on a specific element of his films, and one that I think often gets lost when you look at the movies he's made. You look at monster films and you look at horror films, and a lot of the times I don't think people give credit to the performances that they deserve. So the question is, what is the best performance in a film directed by Adam Wingard? With that said, Jeremy, you are going to be up first on this one, so I will go ahead and give you the timer. It'll start when you begin speaking.
Yeah, for me, having seen a few of Wingard's films, it was just an instant no-brainer. He did a film in 2014 called The Guest, which I think is an awesome kind of throwback to John Carpenter type movies, maybe even a little bit of James Cameron, about this guy who says that he's a soldier. He's returning from war, and he goes to visit the family of a fellow comrade and kind of ingratiates himself into their lives. But we start to learn there's more going on. And this soldier is played by Dan Stevens. And this was really, coming off of the show Downton Abbey. This was him kind of doing something different, and it's an incredible performance. He's this guy who at first you think he's charming, he's so good looking, he's charismatic. Slowly gets revealed there's something going on with him, and then ultimately you basically realize he's basically the Winter Soldier. He's a guy who's had some kind of conditioning done to him during the war, and the guy's going off the rails, and he's freaking terrifying as it goes on. And he is so great. He hits so many notes in this movie, and it's just a wonder to me.
And time. All right. Apologies there. There was a slight internet blip on my end. John, back over to you, though. 1 minute on the clock when ready.
Both in contrast and kind of similar to Jeremy's pick. My pick is Sharni Vincent in You're Next, where basically we have this relative unknown Australian actress coming in and literally killing a extremely physical role and an extremely nuanced role, because she has to go from this rich person's doting girlfriend, like, oh boy, oh goody, you're so rich, to this killing machine by the end of the movie. And it's a really not a subtle transformation. It's definitely a forced transformation where she has to go from, the loving girlfriend to this basically survivalist person, but we learn about her backstory and everything clicks and makes sense. And the fact that they allowed her, unlike Dan Stevens, to actually speak in her actual accent, we didn't have to suffer through her doing a silly American accent. She got to be Australian in the movie, which was great. The dining room scene where she springs into action immediately is like so unexpected and so great, because she turns so physical right away. And unlike in The Guest, it really isn't, there's some comedy in Your Next, but it's front-loaded, and nothing detracts from this very physical, very brutal, very layered performance Sharni Vincent
and
gives.
Time. All right. Jeremy, back over to you. 2 minutes on the clock.
Well, John describes his movie basically. Sharni Vincent is it's straightforward is the term that he used. I would use the term more one note. I think that this is a movie that, it's a cool indie slasher movie, but I don't think that he had the level of cast, the level of script that he would have later on with films like The Guest. I think that Sharni Vincent, she's the girlfriend, and then she starts kicking ass. I think the fact that she was, a dancer, she was in the Step Up movies, makes her very persuasive in the kicking ass scenes. And I think that's the best thing that she offers in the movie. I think in terms of her character, I don't think there's so much nuance there. When you have, a largely, kind of not great cast to play against. You've got directors like Joe Swanberg and Ty West, who aren't really actors in there. These are the people she has to kind of play against. The scenes aren't really that convincing. It's just kind of like they're going through the motion, setting up the story so the kicking ass can happen, as opposed to, The Guest, where there was really a lot more focus put into the casting, the story, you've got Sheila Kelly and Leland Orser as the two parents of the other soldier that he connects with. They're really great actors. You buy every scene that they have with him. And I think his accent's great. I never had a problem with it. I think he's so charming in the movie. And there's so many levels when he's playing with them that because they're all great actors, they're elevating each other, and they have a script that I love that there's a lot of humor in it. I love that it's not one note, but it is really terrifying once it gets to it. I think Micah Monroe actually is a more nuanced and a better character in The Guest as the young woman who has to ultimately step up to Dan Stevens and kick ass. I think she's actually better than Sharni Vinson, and she pales in comparison to Dan Stevens. So you've got a better than, and then a better than, and then a better than there, where Dan Stevens is clearly on the top with what he's giving in his performance.
And time. All right, John, back over to you.
I think Jeremy's focus on the cast in both movies actually is a good point. Dan Stevens has the privilege of working off of like Brendan Maher and Micah Monroe. And I do believe actually Micah Monroe outshines Dan Stevens in this movie because she is such a great final girl. We see her in It Follows. We see her in Watcher. She is perfect at that role. It only serves to make Dan Stevens appear more menacing because really there's nothing really menacing about Dan Stevens' character. You should count the amount of seconds in that movie where Dan Stevens just does this at the camera, and that is what is used to show this guy. Oh, this guy's a narcissistic dick. This guy's dangerous. There are minutes where he just stares at the camera, and that is considered a great acting performance. That is not. That is derivative of Fear, of Cape Fear, of The Stepfather. We've been talking about derivative performances this entire debate. A narcissist guy who's being nice, who really turns out to be a killer, is one of the most derivative things in the world. Dan Stevens was not breaking down any barriers here. And there's also like the person who turns on a thing, Jason Bourne had already happened. The Long Kiss Goodnight had already happened. Like this is derivative of so many performances. Whereas Sharni Vinson's character, it might be a one-note character, Jeremy might say. I'd say it's at least two notes, and Dan Stevens is one note. The two notes the fact she starts the movie, it goes into like a family reunion. She thinks it's just a regular family reunion. She's clearly, playing. There's some gold digger notes like, oh, your family is so rich. Then all of a sudden, boom, on a dime. And yes, she is in there with Ty West and Joe Swanberg and AJ Bowen. But this is Adam Wingard's crew. They were in every movie he had done up to that point. So anything, they had the home field advantage. And Sharni Vinson comes in over the top and does the best performance in the movie. These guys have been working with Adam Wingard the whole time. They knew exactly what he wanted. Sharni Vinson comes in, having never worked with him before, puts on an extremely physical performance, an extremely convincing performance, two separate performances as the doting girlfriend and as the ass-kicking person who kills the serial killers. Whereas Dan Stevens is just the narcissist psychopath that stares at the camera the entire movie. He needs the character. He needs Sheila Kelly. He needs Leland Orser. He needs Micah Monroe. He needs Brendan Maher. He needs all these people to do it. Plus, unnecessary comedy in The Guest detracts.
And time. All right, we're going to go into the 4-minute open discussion. The timer starts when the first competitor speaks.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
The fact that, we had Jason Bourne and all these things and Captain America and Winter Soldier, these were all heroic characters, but to take that character and make him, ultimately this terrifying character is what's unique. And Dan Stevens, we kind of think he's the hero at the beginning. He is that good-looking, heroic guy. And then when you get that first scene of him just staring in his face, it's not because he's a narcissist. It's because somebody did something to his brain. They rewired his brain wrong with some mental conditioning. And I think that the way he does that is terrifying. It's awesome. I love when he did that dead stare.
But it's really just illusory. It's really just illusory. You have this guy, and we don't even understand why he's going back. It's a Gold Star family. It's a grieving family who just lost a war hero son, and then he just comes in and wreaks havoc. This movie, Dan Stevens starts on third base and runs home. Everything is set up for him. All the set pieces put it in place to create the illusion of a great performance. Of course, a guy who's preying on a grieving family of a dead soldier with like a vulnerable daughter and a nerdy son is going to look like
he convinces those people. He has to be a good enough actor to act with those great actors, to be convincing with them, to be charming, and to make Micah Monroe's character kind of have a crush on him, and then instantly turn and we see that he's terrifying. And he is terrifying.
Like Mark Wahlberg in Fear?
He does all of that. He's funny.
Like Robert De Niro in Cape Fear?
He's just as convincing in the kick-assing stuff
like Harry O'Quinn
as Sharni Vinson is.
Yeah, this note's been done before. Like the guy who comes in, charms his way into a family and kills them all, regardless of the training involved, has been done before. The final girl who is actually a secret survivalist.
The stepfather wasn't a soldier.
Not a derivative.
The stepfather was a psycho. This guy was a soldier. He's charming. He's got the soldier skill. He's got all the elements of like a Captain America, the rah-rah guy, and we turn it all on its head. It's fascinating. And there's so much
because you said he was the Winter Soldier, and the Winter Soldier's the bad guy. We know the Winter Soldier's the bad guy. He's not Captain America. He's Bucky. He's brainwashed. He's not a charming soldier. That is his programming. And honestly, like I said, the wolf in sheep's clothing has been done 1,000 times.
He's way more charming than Sebastian
He's not breaking any new ground. Sharni Vincent's character, the final girl who actually is like this Kevin McAllister Home Alone person, has never been done before. And actually, it's been done since. And of course, the Dan Stevens character has been done since because that archetype's existed forever, but it's a derivative thing. And also, can you explain why the need for the comedy? Why the need for the flair throwing the grenades? Why the need for a mixtape when you're killing people? If you're saying it's a menacing performance.
Because John Carpenter had comedy in his films and it's super entertaining. It makes it not one note. The fact that he's funny and terrifying shows what a great performance he's giving.
It's an attempt at humor.
He's really funny and charming and terrifying.
It's not laugh out loud humor. They should have played it that he's totally menacing. Even his death scene is he doesn't die. Spoiler alert. His death scene is so lame where he gets stabbed where he should have killed him. And he's just like, oh, you got me, buddy. Yeah. There's all these lame notes that are just thrown into the movie that detract from what would have been an even better performance if they didn't try to punch it up. There's unnecessary punch up in this character that makes it look silly. If he's really a menacing death machine that is programmed, there shouldn't be time to crack jokes, throw grenades.
He isn't just a menacing death machine. That's why it's even scary. He is kind of a goofy guy in some ways. He's a charming guy in some ways. And he's got bad wiring in his head. So that when he does die, he isn't just the Terminator. He's also Jason Bourne. He's all of these things. And it's really interesting. And my God, if Dan Stevens played Bucky Barnes, how much better would those movies be? Dan Stevens is awesome.
Sebastian Stan is the GOAT.
So much more charming than Sebastian Stan.
Sebastian Stan is great. Anyway, like there's a lot of other things that travel too. There's also like major things they don't explain on purpose to make him look more illusory. There's huge plot holes that are put in there on purpose. There's unnecessary humor. Micah Monroe's giving a better performance, and he stares into the camera. So he's menacing. There's no
and time. All right, we're gonna go into the final minute of the round. Jeremy, you're up first. Time starts when you begin speaking.
Repeatedly praised Micah Monroe's performance in The Guest. I think that she is so much better than Sharni Vincent, she just kind of is the girlfriend and then she's kicking ass. There isn't that much to it, really. She isn't given much to do in the script. She isn't given a cast to really work against, whereas Dan Stevens, he one-ups Micah Monroe because he convinces us that he's charming. He's also terrifying. He's also goofy and funny. And he's able to play all of those notes that they don't give Sharni Vincent. She doesn't get to be funny. She doesn't get to be charming. She's just kind of the girlfriend, and then she's kicking ass. He gets to do all of that, and he's just as convincing in the action as she is. The scene in the bar where he kicks all the local kids' asses is so awesome. And it's this wonderful tightrope act that John Carpenter did in his movies, because we're both exhilarated by the action and he's kind of like the hero kicking ass, but we're realizing that he is terrifying as well. But he isn't a mindless machine. He is a guy with emotions who has bad wiring. It's an awesome performance.
All right, John, over to you. Final minute.
Jeremy's contradicted himself about 20 times. He said he was Captain America. He said he was the Winter Soldier. You can't really be both. He said Micah Monroe is a better performance. If Micah Monroe is the best performance, you should have picked Micah Monroe, because I actually think Micah Monroe was better than Dan Stevens in that movie. Dan Stevens, to show he is menacing, stares at the camera. We waste 5 minutes of the movie throughout several scenes where he has to stare at the camera to show you that he is menacing. There's unnecessary humor. There's unnecessary plot holes. They make the victims extra victimy. It's a gold star grieving family. If you went and put a bag of flaming dog crap on their door, you'd be the worst villain in the history of cinema. It's also a derivative performance. We've seen someone infiltrate a family with false generosity and betray them. It's been seen before. Sharni Vincent's character in You're Next is not a one-note character. There is humor in the beginning of the movie. There's humor there in the movie when she puts the blender in her head. It's like, oh, I put a blender in his head. There are comedic notes. There's great action sequences, and she does bring it. I put the fight scenes in You're Next up against the fight scenes in The Guest. They are equally good. She goes from being a loving girlfriend to like a killing machine. And even in the very last scene of the movie, when she accidentally kills the cop, it's a full gamut.
All right, we're going to go ahead and go to the judges here as I will bring them in. Zach, we're going to start with you. Who gets your vote and what was the main selling point?
I went with John on this one, more because I felt like he had better counters against Dan Stevens, basically saying that we've seen this kind of performance many times before, and just because of that, I went with John on this one.
Okay, Alec, I go to you.
I went Jeremy. I think Jeremy did the other opposite. He was really able to tear down John's argument and build his up way better.
Okay, which means Jake will go to you for the split vote. Who gets it?
I also have John on this one. The way he flipped the cast line that Jeremy threw at him, and he took that and flipped it really well. So, John.
Okay, all right, judges, thank you guys so much. I'm going to go ahead and sit you guys in the back because your winner by a final score of 3-1, it is Calamity John Maher pulling out a big victory. John, again, another victory for yourself. How are you feeling after that?
Honestly, and I'm sure Jeremy's going to say the same thing. Every single one of those questions was absolutely close. I think there was only one where it didn't go to the third judge. So I think these are the kinds of matches that like people want to see. People come with like really good arguments, no dead air, no wasted space. Good, well thought out things that make people who love movies think. So I'm appreciative of Jeremy for debating me. I'm appreciative to you for all three of these questions. And I'm appreciative of the judges for coming in and judging this fairly. So I hats off to everybody. I think this was a great one. This is the one you should watch.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up for you by filling you in. You just got a victory. Now let's fill you in with some good news. Obviously, you came in last year. A lot of people expected you to be the dark horse that sort of stormed the tournament. And obviously, unfortunately, because of your buddy Will, that didn't quite go as I think people might have expected. But you still had a good year. You ended the year 3-1, including a knockout victory with some solid wins over competitors. Obviously, one of them then coming in the tournament against Diaz. You also beat Pez, who's currently up for a number one contendership in a match coming forward. Now you've beaten someone like Jeremy, who is a legacy player of the league, a lot of experience under his belt. At this point, with 4-1 and 1 knockout, whoever your next matchup is, and I don't currently have a matchup picked just because I'm waiting for every match to be recorded that's currently in the lineup just to see who the potential options are. If you win your next matchup at 5-1 with 1 knockout or 2 knockouts potentially, depending on how the match goes, you would then find yourself with the chance of a number one contenders match. Because at this point, I think you've now got wins against big players, experienced players in Pez and Jeremy, and you've got some knockouts. So how are you feeling about knowing that your next matchup again is because it could lead to a number one contenders match? It's only going to be a step up from here. How do you feel about the potential of that?
I feel good. I definitely feel good. Like I feel like now that I've been in enough matches, this being my 5th match, I've got the cadence, I got the tempo. I understand what the majority of the judges are looking for. I understand how this is different from like policy debate in high school. It's really I think the more I do and the more I think about it, I think I still have room to grow. I definitely feel like you haven't seen the best of me yet, and so look out. I'm coming for you. There's more. There's a better John coming next time.
Absolutely. Well, till that next time, sir, take care of yourself. We will see you then, as I'll go ahead and sit you in the back and bring in your opponent. And Jeremy, again, obviously, it's a loss. But as you said about the last couple, your match against Ruru, I don't think it's a loss to be ashamed about in any way. Clearly, in every round, the debate was competitive. You had judges here and there that were on your side. There was never a moment of total domination. So how are you feeling coming out of it?
Yeah, I feel good. John said that it didn't seem like I had nerves, but I definitely did through the first question. I wasn't feeling very confident there. I really felt like John out of the gate was coming with the knowledge and really hitting it hard. But once we got into the second question, I started to feel a little more confident. I feel like from that point on, it was a really tight match, and I feel very good about it. I actually usually you'll be like, oh yeah, the judges did a great job and stuff. I do think, I would have liked to have gotten the point on the Spielberg one and had us go into the blind round. I think that would have been awesome. I think that, all of the arguments were tight. He was great in all of the matches. I just feel like maybe I had a little more there in that one particular argument in terms of what underrated means. But, it was close. I can't, I'm not going to cry sour grapes. And he was great. He has so much knowledge. And I think, based on what happened here today, I have no doubt that he's going to go real deep in this league and, possibly looking at some titles. And, the last guy I played got a title. And, I think this guy is right up there, and I feel like from the first question on, this is a match where, I with those same arguments, I could have won a lot of times. I just happened to go up against a guy like John. So yeah, I'm excited to see where he goes. But, I think, like I said, I haven't played since August. I feel, a bit reinvigorated. I feel like that was a good match. It wasn't like when I played Jay Burns and felt really, really bad. It was like, I feel like I've still kind of got it. I can still do this. Maybe a little more research, a little more just fine tuning next time, and I can get back on the horse here. So I look forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so obviously now, you've taken, unfortunately, a couple losses in a row. So for the next little bit, that does put you out of any potential title picture, which obviously you've been in before and you've been near the top before. Does the idea that now you can, next time you come into this, when you come back, there's no potential path, there's no angle, there's nothing in front of you. You just play to win until you reach that point again. Does that take any sort of pressure off your shoulders, or does it not change how you would approach something like this after a couple of tough losses?
Yeah, I think when I play trivia, I'm always kind of like, I want to prove myself and get to like that title picture. But I think that after doing this, as long as anybody, like I, was one of the original guys here in this league, I think that I've come to a point where I do kind of like just, let's just get somebody who loves movies and have a good, healthy debate and not worry about, oh, this is a title match and this has all these ramifications and, I'm going to have to play more rounds and all of this stuff. And the idea that I'll just have another match that's just another match, that really feels good. And I think, as opposed to trivia, I think that's kind of like a good wheelhouse for me. I think, when I came back, the expectations were kind of high, both from you guys and from myself. And I think, now I'm at a point where it's like, I've proven that I can do this, even though, a couple of the matches like the one today that I lost, were really, really good matches. And I can do this and it's fun to do. And, let's just do this and not have all those expectations. It's fun.
Absolutely, sir. It's always a pleasure to have you. As you said, we've both been doing this for a long time, so it's always great to have you back. And until the next time, take care of yourself, sir. We will see you in the future as we'll go ahead and wrap this up, guys. So, again, it is an excellent match. John picks up another very strong win in his early record, pushing himself closer and closer to where I think he wants to be going forward. And Jeremy, again, he had a longer layoff than most players, and it was a layoff by choice. And I certainly think for him, this season will be about just kind of ramping back up into it. Because you're right, and part of it's on me, just because I like you, and I always thought you were a great debater. But I think there was partially by myself and partially by other older players coming back, an expectation set of, okay, Jeremy was one of those pinnacle players, and he's back here now. And it didn't quite work out. But again, to some extent, there is a positivity in not having the pressure. You play your game, hopefully win some matches, and see where it goes. And so I think both of these guys can leave here today with a lot of positivity in their future going forward. With all that said, though, I want to say thank you to my judges behind the scenes, Jake, Zach, and Alec, for being here tonight. I want to say thank you again to Jeremy, and congratulations to John on the victory. Thank you to all of you watching at home. Please be sure to rate the video, drop a comment, interact with the channel, and subscribe for more Movie Battleground matches, as we always have more matchups coming at you. As we aforementioned, in the coming weeks later this month, as we start March, we are going to have both a title match between current champion Amadou Moses, who is seeking to make his first defense of that title, Jay Burns will be the challenger, taking him on in what is a rematch to see who can come out on top. And then the following week after that, we are going to have a number one contenders match. Former defending champion Henry Sanchez makes his return to the battleground after a layoff from last Christmas. He will take on Austin Howell, who's worked his way towards that number one contenders match, to see who will challenge for the title. So this month has a lot of stakes for the top positions in the league going forward. Stick around for the great matches. And on behalf of everyone here, my name is Aaron Knoll. We will see you next time. Take care.